Scott remembered it and wrote it down and codified it and actually extracted knowledge out of what he experienced. Because I wouldn't say he's an old dog, but just say this dog has seen some tricks and willing to learn some new ones. He's written a number of books, which I'll share tonight. And so I'm excited to have Scott. Scott spoke about a year and a half, 2 years ago, Scott, was it? On his first book.
Yeah, probably. It might have been a year and a half. I think that's when the first book came out, was about a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Yep. And so Scott's been employed in analytics for just say a while, and received his PhD in applied stats from Baylor. He also, since he got his stats degree early, it was sort of before the data science, machine learning aspects came on. Is it Central Connecticut State? I make sure I get this correct. He has a master's from that as well. He's taught across the United States beyond his day job. He's taught at CUNY and other schools on data science, and is a featured speaker in a lot of conferences and the like. So without further ado, Scott, thank you for coming and contributing to us tonight. Scott Burke, please.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to be back with you. I don't remember exactly the last time that we met up, but I think it was about a year it might have been a year and a half ago. Time flies. Yeah, Mike, it's great to be back. And Rick, I certainly appreciate it. And Splunk for sponsoring the event for sure. So if you can see my screen, the first time I presented was right after we launched this first book, or within the first 6 months. It's all analytics. And so that book was all about, well, let me back up. This is a series, right? So it's all analytics. So the first book was all about literacy, right? So it was all about what Mike just talked about. Actually, we have a sea of terms. We have this constant changing landscape of terms, right? So, data science, data mining, machine learning, artificial intelligence, business intelligence, visual BI, you name it. So, that exists for multiple reasons. There are changes in terms across time, but a large part of it is the marketing engine of companies. And I've worked for a software company for years, so I get it, and Dell was really kind of the source when I worked for Dell, was the motivation for writing this book, because Dell was a marketing genius. They talked about big data, they would spin off terms. And so it all sounded new, but when you really looked at it, a lot of it was just a reinvention of many things that we've been doing for years. So that was kind of the first book. And that's what we talked about last time I was here. So this discussion tonight, and I totally meant it to be educational, but at the same time, it's difficult to separate what you've written versus what you want to present and talk about. So I'm going to talk about what I wrote, and we can have a discussion about that in part two, which is more of designing the organization for analytic success. And that has to do with three pillars and what we presented in the book. So why write? Why talk about all this stuff? Well, unfortunately, when you look at analytics, and by the way, so in the first book, I said it's all analytics, and that was the impetus for it, because again, we have these thousands of terms, big data, you name it. You need to have some foundation, and the foundation that I think about is it's all analytics, and then you spin off into subvariants of that, right? You take different vectors from that and discuss, the differences of, ML versus visual BI and, statistics and whatever. So, but it turns out that when you look at analytics success, it's really not that great. I mean, Tom Davenport really kind of started this whole thing, and he actually did the endorsement for both books. It's all analytics, and he wrote kind of the seminal book. He's Harvard Business Review. I think he was a professor at Harvard for a while, and it's Competing on Analytics is his book, and it's really, really good. So he started this revolution. In fact, when Mike was talking about being resilient, we had a user conference, and Tom Davenport actually presented in Austin, Texas. Great speaker, really good guy. So, but he noted with a researcher that 70% of these analytics projects fail. So why? And that was a big part of the second book, right? So we know that companies are investing because they know that they read the success stories, right? They read the Netflix, they read, the Uber, the Amazon. And Amazon, just a side note, I worked for Overstock, and we hired I was hired by somebody from Amazon way back in the day on doing, recommend their systems and that sort of stuff. So anyway, everybody knows that they need to invest. The problem is, how do you invest, and how do you create a culture, an infrastructure to succeed in AI and analytics? So, the problem is that they're just not receiving the return on investments that they expected. So what I like to talk about are what are the gaps, right? So what's missing? And again, I really think it boils down to three pillars that we're going to talk about tonight. So a lot of firms think that they can just add on analytics as a function to their business, right? So we have finance, we have operations, we have marketing, we have production, we have all the different silos in the organization. We just need to create this other silo called analytics, and we'll be fine. I don't agree. We don't need, in addition, we need the evolution, right? So we need to move in and scale into analytics, discovery, and production. So I really think that instead of an addition, you need to re-engineer, and we'll kind of talk through that. So I mentioned the three pillars. We're going to talk about those tonight. And so it really boils down to the organization itself, right? We need data, and we need an analytics infrastructure. And I should say we need knowledge on all of them, right? So, these are very high level, but we need, technology, we need business acumen, we need all the different pieces to fit together. So the first pillar, and my intent right here is I'm going to cover at a very high level those three pieces, and then we're going to dive down a little bit deeper into those three pieces. All right, so if you look at the organization itself, you need to design the organization for success. And again, just what I just said, you can't just add on, right? So that's part of the structure and the culture that you need to develop. And it really needs to permeate the whole organization. I have been around for many, many years. And so when I was at Texas Instruments, I remember when Deming and Total Quality Management came in as a program into Texas Instruments. And so it was a new paradigm, and they didn't silo off the structure for total quality management, TQM. They didn't do that. Everybody at Texas Instruments, it was not a program or flavor of the month. Everybody at Texas Instruments went through rigorous training on what the Japanese had done and why they were successful in manufacturing, and how Texas Instruments was going to play into the next level of manufacturing excellence, right? Great company, but had been, in the late 80s, they weren't as productive as they could have been. And so they developed this program, and just just do a Bing or web search or whatever. I won't mention that G company name. Anyway, do a search there and do a stock chart of what happened to Texas Instruments. And I'm a big advocate. They turned that company around, right? So you can do the same thing with analytics that a lot of companies did. Motorola did a great job turning their company around. So there were semiconductor companies did a great job in really enmeshing the entire organization into a shift and into thinking the way that you do things. So anyway, organizational design for success. And then we're going to talk about structure as well. So it's culture and structure. So this slide is just meant to show, pictures are pretty and I love pictures. So this is just, how you might look at a analytics project team. This is, you need the people in the business, right? So the business experts, so they present the problems, right? They know the business well. You need the analytics expert to convert the business problem into an analytical problem that you can address with data. To do that, obviously, you're going to need good data. You're going to need the data experts that are going to supply that data. And then you need the infrastructure, which normally comes through IT, right? So I'm talking about, not a small shop, but, say a few hundred people to many thousands. You're going to have an IT shop that is supportive. You're not going to do this locally in the business. You're going to have IT support it. So, and please feel free to interrupt it at any point. I don't have that much to present, so I think we can take questions at any time. So the second part of it is data design, right? So I think the first sentence says it all, right? So it doesn't matter if you have great strategic plans. It doesn't matter if you're really smart. To be successful in analytics, you have to have meaningful data, meaning number one, the right data, right? The right data to answer the questions that you're asking within the business. And then second off, that data has to be of quality to support the questions as well. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of it. You got to have the right data, the right values at the right, well, I should say maybe at the right time, right? So you can't have big data delays to try to answer today's questions. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that is the time value of data, right? Because data really has a shelf life. And so if you're going to get results from data, it needs to be at the right time, at the right place, in the right quality to identify that. So, having worked for a software company, I do believe that, there's all this different data coming in and there's this different messaging and everything, which if you work for, someone that's a company that's trying to execute, it becomes very obfuscated, and so it becomes difficult. And in fact, I think that's the reason that, I can remember 30 years ago, the last bullet point, that we solved the data problem for 30 years. There's been all these technologies that said that, buy our platform, we'll clean up your data, we'll join it, we'll present it in the right formats, etc. We're still not there. Literally, I've been doing this over 30 years and it's the same problem.
Say,
And
Scott,
then there's this analytics technology. Yeah.
I have a question that you invited questions, so I figured I'd just ask one that's on my
Sure.
mind about the prior slide on the data side. A lot of businesses, and I think anywhere, but a lot of established businesses have data that they feel they have a pretty good handle on. It's the things of their design, it's their systems, whether they developed them, acquired them. But now they find themselves being exposed to data sources that they maybe never worked with before. Public data sets, things that come from governments or universities, or new kind of more observational information like logs and things of that nature. Could you just talk a little bit about what a business might want to best wrestle with trying to figure out how to incorporate that into what may be a well-designed but somewhat limited or stodgy existing model?
Yeah, Randy. So we're actually, part of the presentation is we're gonna talk about some of those sources. So
we can talk later.
I mean, I could talk a little bit about it now, but we're gonna, each one of these sections, right, 1, 2, and 3, we're gonna dive much deeper in. So absolutely, we're gonna talk about APIs. We're gonna talk about data virtualization.
It was your shelf life
when
comment.
we get there,
it was your shelf life comment that triggered the thought and the reason that I figured I'd ask something right now. But if you're going to go into this in more detail later, we'll cover it then.
Yeah. So really, to that point, there really is, there's lots of nice curves on time to value of data. And so if you look at that, I should say not time to value, the degradation of value of data to time. So it's like an inverse power curve. If you think about it, it really is, a degradation. So
very good. Thank you.
Which, yeah, my mind, it just spins off. There's a great study of Ricoh copiers. I think it was Ricoh that it was a little bit different event, but it was kind of like that. Just real quickly, what they did is they looked at, they had a recall of a bunch of copiers. And so they identified it after all the copiers were out in the market, right? So, and they looked at what it was going to cost. It literally cost tens of millions, and this is a long time ago. It was tens of millions of dollars, but would have been hundreds of millions today. And then with interesting analysis, what they did is they said, okay, we caught this in the field after the copiers were delivered. If we had caught that before the copiers came off the dock, what would it have cost the company? And it would have been $100,000. If we caught that in production, in manufacturing, what would the cost been? And it would have been tens of thousands. And they just moved it up the chain. And then it was like in design. If we caught it in design, how much would it cost? It would cost 25 cents. So, yeah. So what we'll talk about a little bit in this section is just, basics of analytics technology, what you should look for, some things to keep an eye on as far as, not data governance, but analytics, model governance, that kind of thing. And so when you look at model maturity and even ethics, model ethics, et cetera, we'll talk a little bit about that there. All right, so some say it starts with data. It really doesn't, right? So again, to that point, you can have the best data in the world, but if you don't have, I'm going to flip it, if you don't have the organization that's ready for the data, then you don't have really much at all, right? So the first thing to consider is the organizational alignment. Start with the end in mind. So you need to think about what problems that you're working on, what problems you want to solve, and then design your organization to support those. And every organization is different, right? So some organizations need more functional alignment, You know, the dedicated silos that we mentioned earlier. Some organizations need more like they thrive on a center of excellence. A COE is a center of excellence where you have like a matrix organization. The COE will be an analytics organization that is cross matrix to the lines of business, right? So you'll have the different lines of business that are operating, and then you'll have membership of the COE, the center of excellence, that go across that. Those could be data scientists. Those could be business intelligence analysts, or visualization architects, et cetera, that move across the vertical. A COP is a center of practice. A center of practice is more of a cross-functional group that doesn't day-to-day respond to projects. It exists to increase the level of knowledge across the organization. So, for example, at TIBCO, I was the global healthcare leader for our healthcare community of practice. And so we had relationships with partners across the globe. We had relationships with certainly, obviously, the internal organization, which would be sales, marketing, which field sales, internal sales. We would do, you know, webinars. We would try to educate, you know, what TIBCO products did. We interface with engineering on what we were hearing in the field, what products we need to you know, develop and introduce. So a community practice is a little bit different animal, and so that's an interesting part. And I talk a little bit about it in this book, but I talk more about it in another book I'll tell you about. And then, you know, do you have a project manager that supports your analytics projects? I mean, that's if it's done right, that really adds value to the whole thing. And then again, literacy, that goes down to what we were talking about a minute ago with the first book. Is everybody speaking the same language? If, you know, if marketing is speaking French and engineering is speaking Spanish, and, you know, finance is speaking, you know, Yiddish or whatever, you know, it's really kind of hard. But if you can educate at least on a baseline, that goes back to the TQM thing. If you can have a baseline understanding of what the common analytics language is, it goes really a long way. And I won't go through all the numbers there, but again, this is kind of a different study on some of the stats. And again, one pops out that 53%, this 2019, so it's, I guess, 3 years old, but 53% states that they're not yet treating data as a business asset. And by the way, I'm a little bit jaded. These numbers don't seem to change near as much as they should.
Hey,
so,
Scott, this is Rick.
Yeah.
I've got a question about that. I really do agree. I've been in a lot of organizations, and you know, I think the challenges are well identified. I'd love to hear your perspective on, and even some of the organizations, they really don't want to call their baby ugly. You know, they know there's an issue. So what is, you know, does it take one or two key people to, you know, sort of set the goals? Are there certain data measurements they themselves can take on how they're improving things along the way? And I think there seems to be a lot of opinion along the way of how to, you know, or desire to improve, an opinion wanting to improve, but I'm not sure, unless oftentimes it seems it's a leader who's driving things. to do it. So I guess it's an open-ended question, but it's, I understand the terms, but how do we measure and, how do they take steps forward that they know they're making progress?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, I mean, the last thing you said, I think I was on to two key terms. So let me go to those first. Accountability and incentives, right? To the first part of it. The last sentence you just said, it tends to metrics, right? But you can't really have incentives unless you do have metrics. But absolutely, I'm a big advocate of, again, part of the organization design is making sure the organization has not only the right structure, but has the right incentives to it. So, Rick, do you think, in your question, do you have the right accountability? I mean, you mentioned the executive leader. Are they the only one that are hanging their hat on the success here, or is the whole group? I mean, what do you think about accountability and incentives?
Well, I've been in selling organizations in the data industry forever, and my fear here is there isn't one answer. Sometimes it's driven from a certain set of leaders who have pushed the culture through the organization, and they did a lot of the right things, got people thinking the right way. On the other hand, I've seen organizations build from, like a piece of the organization that solved a lot of problems. And, everyone started looking toward them as, an example of, a positive change. And that sort of went through the organization. I don't know. And I don't know if there is an answer, but the problems themselves of getting people to speak the same way and to align themselves, I'm spot on there. I just don't know all, my questions are, is each answer a custom one in these organizations? I don't know. That's kind of an open-ended frustration. And it's frustrating, I'd say, in the Midwest, where I'd say our experience in some of the data analytics stuff has been, behind other parts of the country at times. There's some great examples of, thriving organizations, but others, in some of the, let's just say, the older, manufacturing communities and that, it's tougher, but yet it still isn't as important to improve, if you're manufacturing, all the data stories that are there. So I don't have an answer. Or,
yeah,
I'm tossing this out there because I see a lot of the broken pieces out there and a lot of the challenges organizations have, but I don't know what the formulas are. And we didn't entertain any commentary from our field if anyone has any opinions there too. So it's an open-ended comment, but it's sort of it's the reason I'm involved in this organization, because it frustrates the heck out of me that we don't do better at all of that.
Yep. Again, I think the reason we don't do better is it is accountability and incentives. And I am going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to blaze through a little bit of this because I really want to talk about well, I'll just jump to it. Okay. So there's a really interesting phenomenon that goes on with that accountability incentive. So culture is really, in fact, I guess maybe I didn't have one slide about culture. Maybe not. Anyway, so when you look at, again, to this point, some say it starts with data. It really doesn't. Is the fact that you have the alignment. That means to me, what that means is, you start out with the strategic plan, or the goals, at least, that the organization wants to fulfill. I'm going to show you in a minute some of my thoughts on that. It's a different book. It's about the executive guide. It's really meant for the executive suite on making sure that you align those goals to an executable strategy, right? So you can design the best strategy, the best goals whatsoever, unless you align that with what the capability, both financially, as well as knowledge base, as well as, tool sets and everything within the organization, you won't get there, right? So that's kind of what that's all about. And I would have liked to, if I had known it at the time, I would have liked to included it here, some designs on structure. So check out Safi Bacall. It's S-A-F-I, first name. Bacall is B-A-C-H-A-L-L. He wrote a book called Loon Shots, where he talks about the fact that incentives have such a big deal. So it's not necessarily how you organize people into different slots. It's also what they do, right? So he gives a great example of Uber, right? And he talks about Uber, and they have a lot of problems, right? But anyway, one of the problems that they had is they had an 8x multiple in the organization for engineers, or actually, I think it was the whole company. In other words, you could make, let's suppose an engineer made $100,000 a year, and they had a $30,000 bonus target. They could actually make $240,000 because they had an 8x multiple. And so he talks about the fact that, okay, if you have that multiple, would you, and culture is an overspun term. So would you go around and say rah, 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 and try to help somebody in the next cube, or would you be really trying to work on something that really just made your bonus the max it could? So you have to be very careful of bonus and incentive structure. So that's something that just came to mind. And again, that's the reason I throw out accountability with what you said, accountability and incentives. You have to really be careful, because people, if you've ever, there's Freakonomics, I read that book. I mean, that's all about incentives. So, comment? Anything?
So you can raise a hand and we'll get you unmuted. Or I could just call on you.
All right. Well, I'm going to be going through some of these slides fairly quickly, because I'm looking. We need to wrap up probably in the next 10 minutes and open it up.
No, you're good. You're good. You've got 10, 20, whatever.
Okay. All right. So the second piece of this is the data's design for success. And this is one of my favorite quotes of all times. It comes from the movie Sneakers. It's all about the data. Exactly. The world isn't run by weapons anymore, or energy, or money. It's run by little ones and zeros, little bits of data. It's just electrons. So I'm kind of dating myself. That Robert Redford, I can't remember the other guy, but anyway, good movie, and I love that quote. And here's one of mine. So data alone does nothing. Data itself is just a cost, right? So when you acquire data, why do you acquire it? Certainly you acquire it for operations, and that's a good thing. But I've seen over and over and over and over, and I used to be a director of a data warehouse and BI, and what do you want in here? What do we collect? Everything. So really, you don't need everything. You need some design. You need, some discipline in your design. So anyway, just a couple other quotes. So as a statistician, this is what I'm about. And, you know, why is it important? Well, data really just tells you what happened, right? So it's a human-made artifact of a process, and our entire life is processes, right? I get up in the morning, I go in, I brush my teeth, I take a shower, you know, drive to work, whatever. Every single one of those things is a process. You know, making dinner is a process. Everything. And so how do you improve process? First, you have to capture the data, the relevant data, because I mean, you could certainly, any process, you collect data that's not important, or you can collect data that is important. We're collecting a lot of data now that's not important with IoT and IIoT and everything else, but the data itself is really the cornerstone any way that you improve. And so, you know, even though we collect a lot more data in our firms, our organizations, we really don't use that data. We can't, because we're collecting it, you know, 175 zettabytes, you know, by 2025. You just can't, you know, use all that data. In fact, there's a term called dark data out there as well. Data that's collected and never used, that just sits idle. And that's not even operational. It's every purpose. It's just collected, period. It's never touched. So just a couple of technologies to think about since we were talking about it. You know, and Randy, you pipe in here, you know, so you have the pipes, right? So part of the design is the pipes itself. So where do you collect the data? You can have APIs, application programming interfaces. You can have streaming data. You can have event-based data that's triggered off of, you know, someone coming in and, you know, making a transaction or whatever. You can store that data into, you know, data marts or, you know, enterprise data warehouses, lakes, or, you know, data on the cloud. And then there's one interesting technology that's available called data virtualization, where you kind of, it's more of like, if you're familiar with like a logical logical view, it's really more akin to that, although you do have some physical data. It is a way to bring data across disparate data sources. It could be your data warehouse along with, let's say, Salesforce, right? So you have all these cloud-based applications. You want to do analytics from that. And so it's a way to bring all that different data in, and it's in real time, and you don't persist any of the data. It doesn't sit around. You need to consider data governance and data management, right? So, and this is really important as far as, you know, managing that volume, along with stewardship on cleansing that data, making sure it's relevant, et cetera. And then the last part is, you know, think about data for purchase, right? So there's a lot of data. IBM really invested. They bought the Weather Channel, and they bought some other companies, and it was solely for the data that they had. It was not for the technology. It was for the data, the historic data, and they're monetizing that data there. And then, you know, data for tomorrow is basically, you should always be thinking about, first off, you shouldn't collect a lot more data than you need, but at the same time, you should always be thinking about, this is the data I need to solve today's problems. What data will I need to solve tomorrow's problems? And so that's kind of that point there. And this just talks about some of the things that I was just talking about. I don't think we need to go into, this is more tech. I won't spend a lot of time with that. So, and this is kind of interesting. Just spend a few seconds on this. So, on the left panel, you have two data visualization BI, Viz BI charts, right? So the top one versus the bottom one. Which one of the dashboards is wrong? Can you tell which one? It's the one with the wrong data. So how do you know what data is right? Well, the enterprise data warehouse, the EDW, solved that. That was for a while, that was the initial purpose of the EDW. And I'm good friends with Bill Inman. He's the father of data warehousing. But what's happened now is, it's not just your organization's data. You have all this data that's coming in from the cloud. You have all these SaaS, the software as a service applications that you have coming in. You're not going to download Salesforce every night and put it into your EDW. That just doesn't happen. What about Hadoop? What about, you're not going to push Hadoop, cluster Spark data into your data warehouse every night either. You're going to leave those separate. So how do you merge? And you just tons of APIs, right? I mean, it could be government data, it could be whatever that you're sourcing, maybe CDC data, you're getting data on COVID or whatever. Well, they have APIs, but you're not going to download the whole volume from the CDC. You're going to make a query. And so data virtualization allows you to do those things in real time and not persist the data inside of a database, but it allows users to have a business catalog, and a whole lot more. Anyway, just check it out. And you can make a screenshot of that. Some of the advantages. Again, governance, it's the whole slew. Well, again, you can't solve a problem if you don't have good data. So governance tries to address that problem. Master data, reference data, important again, and then I kind of go through, we talked a little bit about that. So again, this is kind of back to basics, right? Before you start any analytics project, you should understand what the business problem is at hand, right? Get everyone involved that has that business knowledge, clearly define what you're trying to do, what metrics you're going to use to solve, or how do you know if you're successful? You have to know what key metrics you're going to start with and move towards, right? What are the gaps? Analytics maturity. So this is kind of, how do we progress from, just reporting, where the way I look at this real quickly is that cognition happens in two places, right? To me, cognition happens in my mind or it happens inside my computer. So where do I want to place cognition? I want to place most of it on my computer if it can help me, right? So let's say even Visual BI, what that does is it takes the raw data, it takes it from a table and it puts it into pictures that I can, as a human being, analyze very quickly. And then if I go from there, how do I know if a picture is really meaningful? Then I can use statistics to understand, yeah, that is real, or no, I'm just seeing something that really doesn't exist. And then you can use ML, machine learning and everything up from there into, AI and optimization. So that's kind of the maturity curve that we have going. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip. That's an interesting story you can check out. But Netflix, you know, they paid $1 million and didn't use the algorithm that they paid $1 million for. Let's switch again. I'm kind of seeing some of this. I'd like to get into an open discussion. I apologize that I'm kind of flipping through these.
Do you think
But you can check out Feature Store.
Do you think your base slide deck is something you'd be willing to share with the community?
Yeah, I think so. I might need to double verify, but I think so.
Yeah. If you could send it through to Rick as a PDF or, you know, some indelible format, we'd be delighted to make it available to folks, and that might help people from who's trying to do screenshots or write notes down from going too crazy.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Randy. And then, yeah, I'd love to have a copy of the video as well, that I can share with mine. So yeah, just a quick comment on this technical debt. This is really interesting concept in that, you know, it's kind of like total cost of ownership, if you're familiar with that. So it's like, you know, how much does it really cost? I mean, you have the basic numbers within a business, but what's the whole thing? And we go through that as well. And then storytelling, right? You know, and that's kind of what this is about, the technology to tell the story. And we kind of go into that a little bit. David, a co-author, is a big Monty Python fan and put this together. So, but as a statistician, I will say, don't let the story precede the significance, right? Because as humans, the great thing is that we can, man, you look through a table of numbers, it takes you a while to figure out what's going on, okay? Is it, what are we doing here? You look at a picture, boom, it's right there. Unfortunately, that boom can be real or that boom can be not so real. So I'm going to write about that someday. I haven't done that yet. Anyway, so yeah, I'll share this deck with you. And I think we can probably, considering that, I think we just move into open discussion, except for my little plug. So this is a shameless plug. I got 2 books coming out this year. One, I mentioned the Executive Guide to AI Analytics. I do talk about Safi Bahcall and the COE and COP structure. This is meant for you know, managers and leaders that are responsible for AI analytics. It's a very high level. There's no math or really anything very deep in it. It's meant as, you know, my take on what's needed to fill the gap there. And then Gary Miner, my co-author, asked me to write a couple of chapters in their medical. So I talk about Bayesian analysis and some causal versus you know, causation versus correlation. And if you're familiar with Judea Pearl, the guy from UCLA that did some stuff there. Anyway, those are coming out this year, and then next year will be book 3 that we've been just talking about. So, and then if you want to contact me or interact with me, here's some ways that you can do that. Would love to connect on LinkedIn. Send me an invite. Twitter, if Elon buys it, I'll be back. I have a website. It's allanalytics.com. Email, same, or at outlook.com. And then I have a YouTube channel where I try to share stuff as well. So I think that's it.
Okay, and we can open it up to anyone I will actually just open up everyone's mic. So if you want to unmute yourself, you are more than welcome to interact with folks here. So everyone should be able to speak if you unmute yourself. I dare you to.
I do have follow-on questions, but I want to let somebody from the audience start first before I consume more of your time, Scott.
Hi, Scott. Can you hear me okay?
Hi. Yes.
Hi, my name is Paul, and I work at a small company. And my data team I was hired on, and it's just me. I'm sure you get you meet a lot of people like that in the industry. What is the most common question you get from others like me, and what's the most common advice you give?
Well, with that, I would say do as much as you can to understand the business. I mean, obviously, you were hired for your expertise in data. And I can tell you from, personal experience, I probably could have done better early on in my career.